Hello students, welcome back to the lecture on decision analysis. This is the second topic that we are seeing in the module 6 on the factors impacting the quality of the decision, right? The previous topic was on meta decision, and now we are going to the next step of decision making, which is framing a decision. I have picked this information from an article of Harvard Business School called the Creating a Winning Frame. Let us get into the lecture. Framing is the process of structuring a problem. Okay, let's look at this picture that you see here. You see there are multiple frames, like this is one big frame that you see, and then there are multiple frames here, the small frames, and you have a frame here and things like that. But if you actually look at each one of them, you don't get a full picture of the whole scenery, right? But when you look at all of them together, you get a good perspective, and that is actually the point of framing. That is the purpose of framing. So framing actually simplifies a complex issue. Just imagine that you don't have this frame at all and it is just open. Then what will happen? Like, you will not be able to focus on a particular thing of this entire scene, right? You want to actually see if there are some people living in this hill, then you have to look through this frame. And if you want to see if this is a picnic spot, then you have to look through this frame, and something like that. Okay, so a frame has a purpose that limits, that sets a boundary for the view so that we can gain some focus on it. But in order to gain a good perspective, you need to have multiple frames with it, and that is what is given in the set of points here. So when we say that you need to have multiple frames, it's pretty difficult to gain multiple perspectives with a single person. So if you have a team, then you know that each one of them will bring their perspective to the problem or the situation, and when you assemble them together, you get a complete perspective of the problem. And this is the most famous example that all of us know, that five blind men try to figure out what an elephant is. So one person looking at its trunk says that it's like a snake, a big snake. And the other guy says that it's a spear, looking at its trunk, at the tusks. And then the other guy is saying that it's a fan and things like that. So an elephant is an assemblage of all of them. So each one has their own perspective, but to gain the overall perspective, you need to assemble them together. So this is how you gain an insight into a problem. And when you gain such an insight, you have actually framed the problem. So that's what the slide talks about. Why should we frame? I'm just explaining that framing enables shared understanding. Like going back to the previous one, each one has their own perspective, but when you frame a problem, assembling all those individual frames together, then you get a complete perspective. So a frame enables shared understanding. Otherwise, each one of us will be talking from our own standpoint, and a well-framed problem is almost solved. The reason being that when you can define a problem, which is the most important thing, when you can define a problem, the alternatives, the information that need to be gathered, the reasoning that we need to do, and the decision that we need to make, all of them will become something like a simple process by which it just happens by itself. Okay, so framing is the most important aspect of any problem, any decision making. And if you have a bad frame, how much ever accurate your data are, or whatever be the computational ability that you have to analyze the data, you will not be able to compensate the wrong frame that you have defined in the beginning. So you will actually be solving a wrong problem. So any amount of data or analysis cannot compensate for an ill frame. Okay, but this is one of the key problem with several of our analysis and data. Now that the data is available so freely and you have computational tools, our tendency to is to gather as much data as possible and then start analyzing them. But if the frame has been wrong, then all these facilities, these resources are of no use. And a manager's most demanding job is to select and manage the process of framing, because this is where the bottleneck is, and this is the most difficult process. Gaining perspective, assembling those perspective, and then defining a problem in an objective way is the key for solving or making the right decisions. And when a frame is done correctly, then you can fairly rest assured that your decision quality will improve substantially. Okay, this is an example that I have captured from one of my professional experience. Like, we had a situation which was a very critical situation, and we wanted to make certain important decisions in order to resolve an issue. Okay, by reading this statement you will understand what is the issue, and look at the way in which the problem has been framed. The valve we shipped 2 days back to France for an ASME testing, okay, American Society of Mechanical Engineers testing, was not as per the current drawing. Our quality assurance department noticed it last evening while compiling inspection pack. It cannot proceed to lab test as it is because it has been manufactured as per an earlier drawing. How do we meet the test date without reschedule? It's a mission critical project for France. So if you actually look at it, you gain, in just 2 sentences, you gain an overall perspective of the problem. And there is clear objectivity in the whole thing. There is no blame game, and we are just asking the right question. And this is one of the very well framed problem statement. Okay, like, let us look at what is a winning frame. What are all the various elements of a winning frame? When we say a winning frame, a frame that will lead to a quality decision making is what we call as a winning frame, right? So let us look what are all the various features of it, what are all the various aspects of it. It is defined by boundaries. A winning frame is defined by the boundaries. When we say boundaries, it means that the scope, okay, and it will have reference points from which perspective this is the case. There is a reference point, and there is a clear yardstick. How do we measure this particular aspect, this particular feature, this particular parameter, and things like that? We will talk a little bit about that a little later. Then when we talk about boundaries, the boundary conditions are that what is included, what is excluded, and why is it excluded. So you need to answer these 3 questions in order to set a boundary. When you ask this question, why is it excluded, you are actually checking your understanding of defining the problem. You cannot simply say that, okay, let us include all these things and then exclude all these things. This is a very critical question that you need to answer as to why should we exclude certain things and include only certain things. The reference points are, as I mentioned, are the vantage points, and it can be comparisons also. When we say that this has to be done this way, you can compare it against an already existing method, or analogy can be used, and things like that. And when we get into the yardstick are measures of performance. What will you consider to be an objective, the right objective, and things like that? When we talk about them with an example, you will understand them better, but now I'm just giving you the some brief description of that. And then aim, the target value, and ratios and percentages and things like that. We normally use ratios and percentages, but it's not a great idea to use ratios and percentages because they are relative in nature. what we call as 10 percentage for a base. When the base rate is different, then it can mean a lot of different things, and so it's not a great idea to have a ratio or a percentage as a yardstick. Let's move on. Metaphor as a frame. Metaphors can be used for framing a problem in situation where the problem is very complex and it cannot be verbalized so easily. So this is an important way to frame complex problems. Let's look at a simple example. Okay, when we say strategy and mention chess, we are able to relate what a strategy actually means, because there is a lot of ambiguity about the word strategy, but when we can express it by a game of chess, then you can easily understand that. Similarly, when we talk about an inventory and then show an iceberg which has a tip on the above the sea level, you can really see that this is actually a huge problem. If you even have a small tip, you only see a small tip on the top, but it means that there is a lot of issues under the cover, is what you can see. And so something like that. And this is a classic example where Honda, when they wanted to design a new car for the world, they framed the problem as theory of automobile evolution. It's interesting that they mentioned this, they compared it with an evolutionary process of a biological organism, right? So when you the question they asked was like, if automobiles are biological organisms and if they evolve from what they are currently, what will be the next important evolutionary change, is what they asked this question, and they ended up with the world most popular successful model called the Honda City, right? And the city, when it just took the world into a storm by way of gaining huge market share across the world. Then a good frame states the issues objectively, like a research paper. I gave you one example, and it describes how the issue came to be noticed. Because this is one thing which can actually increase the credibility of the information that we got, and it pronounces how the issue impacts the business or individual. So all these three are the key elements of a good frame. You have to check whether you are addressing your frame in this way. Then the most common mistakes are proposing solutions even before we start defining the problems. Then listing the causes of the problems as the problem itself, stating wishful intents like I have to balance this, I have to achieve this, I wish. All those things are all not the right way of framing a problem. Stating something that is not in our control, which we call as an attribution error. Whenever we want to decide something, we always find that the problem is sitting outside our purview, and that is another issue with framing. And then not being objective, stating objectives as the problems. Problem statement is different, objectives are different. Okay, problem is defining it, and the objective is what will we get by solving this problem. Then lack of perspective, we discussed a lot about it, and being emotional about the framing. Okay, there is no emotions involved when you are making an objective framing, and influenced by any of the biases that we discussed. One of the semester, what I did was that I asked the students to frame their problems. And I just picked, there were several statements that they shared with me, and I picked just 4 of them, masking several important, some of the details, confidential details. And what I want you to do is that I want you to pause this video at this stage and then look at each of these statements and then see whether they actually meet the criteria that I mentioned to you. Are there any common, the 9 mistakes that we have listed here, or is it a good frame, and things like that. I want you to figure it out yourself. Okay, then this is what is known as a frame analysis worksheet. Whatever we have discussed now, I have categorized them, I have listed them into 10 points. So when you are defining a problem, you need to actually look at each one of them and then include them as a part of your frame analysis worksheet. It's a good practice, and it is given in a book called The Decision Traps by Edward Russo and Shoemaker. Okay, then I have also given an example of say purchasing a personal vehicle like a car or a two-wheeler or something like that. I have taken that as an example and then updated this frame analysis worksheet. I want you to look at this as an example and then try to make a frame analysis worksheet yourself for any of the problems that you would like to solve. And this is also important for the exam point of view. Right? And with that, I conclude this lecture. Thanks for watching.